for handling.
That's what she said.
Like I did some cooperative care. He does like a muzzle rest and stuff like that, which he does fine until it comes down for someone to like
actually get it done.
And then it's like, and then if I have to ask him again, he'll start getting super shitty.
Yeah.
Like growling, and so it's handling. Like I said, the chip check. At this point, I would not be able to pass a chip check with him. Just mainly because of touching.
Sure.
If he were to, sometimes he could be reactive to other dogs if they like look at him and like their tail goes up and they're like, and like the prong collar, if you pop him on the prong collar, like
he's not having it.
You're activating. So suppression works mostly best for him.
Understood.
But other than that, like I said, he's generally good. Like in situations like this, but like right now, if you were just like, oh hey, and went to touch him, he gets super.
He's not into it.
Yeah.
So
that's his.
Now, when you say he gets super shitty, right? So, like, I know my Malinois, for example, who's obviously from the same litter. Like, he is a lot of talk, you know what I mean, with minimal action, if that makes sense, right? So, I mean, like, don't get me wrong, like, he'll get you, you know, in a situation if you push his buttons enough. Yeah. But, like, he's just noisy and growly and grumbly, you know what I mean? And he's got those tendencies to him.
Sure.
But, like, it's all highly manageable and can be worked through. You know what I mean? We're going to start actually enforcing these things pretty strictly. We're going to be working on more of the pet dog state of mind stuff of like extended duration, and we're going to focus on socialization and all those types of things. But I don't think that there's really a middle ground from the standpoint of like you have the working dog mindset of like you basically let the dog just be a working dog, right? And the pet dog, like, he's gonna be good with all the guests that come over the house, right? And we're gonna be able to socialize him regularly, and if we go out and about, people can pet him and like all that kind of stuff. Now, the reason why I say all that is because I want to just isolate a couple of target goals here. Now, vet-related things, regardless of if he's a working dog or not, like obviously handling is a big part of things, and that was something that even in the working dog community we did a lot of, because in Mondial Ring, for example, the judge had to come examine the dog before we went into trial, so we needed to make sure the dog was going to be okay with those types of things, which kind of went hand in hand, right? So we could work on those types of things. As far as a couple of the things you brought up, as far as like guests coming over and stuff like that, if those are things that you really want to kind of dive into, there's going to be more that goes into that than just like how do we introduce him a little bit better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So like the guests was never.
All right. So where is his typical trigger? I know you said touching. Was it touching in general? Is it just interacting with them? You know what I mean? Reaching.
Like I've had people try to give him food when he was like 9 months old. I was at a trial, and it was like a very dog savvy person that had a Malinois, and he's like, "Can I say hi to your puppy?" And I'm like. So I'm like, can you give him food? He's like, yeah, sure. So I reached, I gave him like a big handful of meat, and the second he went like this, he was like, ah, and he literally just
freaked out.
Like,
you're like, sorry.
He just like dropped it. So it's like
I understand.
It's reaching, it's...
Now, in the example of like vet visits and stuff like that, have you ever done something like kind of how we're doing now where you just hand off, they take them?
That's how they weigh him. And
okay.
It's like, it's my vet's son. He's like 17 years old. So I just go in the side door.
Yep.
They have me come in the side door, I think, because he's muzzled, because he's not bad in the waiting.
Yep.
And they're like farm people, so they're not like, they're just like, okay, I'll bring him right back.
Which is exactly how we want it to be.
And I asked him, I'm like, does he give you any problems? And he's like, no, but they're not like,
I understand.
And talking to him.
So what I'll be interested to see here is how this dynamic changes, since that's how we started this here right now, because every situation you've described to me so far, as far as where he's had a big issue with stuff, has been people going into his space, it sounds like, right? Which truthfully is a massive trigger for a lot of dogs, you know what I mean? And you know, even in our vet visits and stuff like that, we just made a video about it just a couple weeks ago or something like that. The number one place where the vet visits go really, really wrong is like you're in the waiting room or you're in the examine room and you guys have them and the person goes up and they're like, hey, how are you? And they come into the space and go to grab and then the dog's like, rah, 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 and then we stop and then it's just a mess from there. You know what I mean? So I try to sidestep as much of that as possible, and when my vet comes in, it's like, here's the leash, take him, then go about doing the examination. Yeah, that's so some of the things that I did with mine to make him more like pet dog friendly is I did a lot of things like this where I had other people working him. I worked a lot on, because like obviously Malinois, they're very attached dogs, right? When they have their person, it's like, I gotta get back to my circle, you know what I mean? And mine was exactly like that as well. But the problem was, I think it was back in like maybe 2016 or something, I took him to a seminar and we were working like separation anxiety drills and stuff like that. And the guy took him, he's like, hey, walk out of the room for a second, right? And I walked out of the room and Vinny went bananas, right? And the issue was, right, and this was still when I was kind of transitioning to the pet dog kind of thing, the issue was not that he had separation issues. The issue is that when he had separation issues, he didn't respect anybody else enough to be able to focus back in. You know what I mean? So working drills where, okay, cool, obviously he wants to get back to you guys, but can somebody else get him to focus in and do something well enough where he could at least temporarily respect them? You know what I mean? And I saw that, you know, with my wife and stuff as well, where, you know, he had a lot of attachment issues with me, and then I needed to get her to do a lot of stuff with him, and, you know, kind of started balancing everything out overall, right? So right now, all I'm doing is I'm kind of just making him make the first contact. So before I actually go and do any sort of interaction or anything like that, I kind of just have him touching my leg here, just starting to get used to that, right? The key, you know, there's a couple keys to it, obviously. You know, you're never gonna make a Malinois not a Malinois. You know what I mean? Like, even to this day with my dog, like when I take him to the vet, I still muzzle him. You know what I mean? Like, I'm still careful about how I still have a pretty strict routine of how I introduce him to new people. You know what I mean? But over time, because I've implemented so many of these techniques with him, like he really is fine, right? Like I have guests come over the house, like new people, this, that, he can interact with children and stuff, you know, and we've gotten past so many of these hurdles, but it was a long road, you know what I mean? Like there were some things that I did with him that, like, for example, when I transitioned from sport dog to pet dog, for the first probably 6 months that I started doing that and started having him like around my guests and family when they came over, he held a bed stay in the corner the entire time they were there, right? And we started that socialization process by basically teaching him, you're practicing impulse control and getting acclimated to being around these people. You know what I mean? Sniff them, smell them, hear them, and don't, because you can tell with him, and Vinny used to do this as well, he's just so impulsive. You know what I mean? Like when he wants to get to something or get away from something, it's just go. You know what I mean? That's like their drive. And even stuff like this, right? Like he starts getting antsy and the drive is go, right? And I think a lot of the problem is, especially when you get into the context of a vet visit or grooming or things like that, because they're in kind of a rush, we do what I refer to as like stupid things of like try to interact with the dog while they're in that state of mind. And because they're already in this impulsive state of mind, what do Malinois do when they're nervous and impulsive? They bite, right? So first and foremost, focusing on like the reason why I'm petting him and it's not an issue is because I got him acclimated to being in my space. I made him make that first contact. I waited until I got him to a slightly more chill state of mind. Then I can go about interacting. You know what I mean? It's so much like I talk about Vinny all the time because like I learned so much from going through all those different phases from him. Yeah. And with a dog that's not serious, but like not your average dog, obviously, I'm able to implement that stuff with like my pet dog clients like so much easier, you know? Because it all is the same, and it's like if you can get a dog like this to be able to kind of be okay with some of that kind of stuff, it's so much easier when you're dealing with a dog that doesn't have those like heightened levels of drive. You gotta relax, bro. So in a minute here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna push this a little more, and I'm gonna kind of, you know, move around, touch his head, right, mess with his paws, stuff like that, kind of see how he does with that.
So in a normal setting, if you were acting like this, I would yell at you. Assuming you don't want me to say anything.
Well, the problem is, like, what are you gonna do right now that's gonna do anything? Because here's the thing. No, I understand, okay, right? But like the issue is, right, you don't like his behavior right now, right? So yes, telling him down in that moment would be giving him something else to do, but that's not telling him, hey, you gotta stop what you're doing right now. You know what I mean? And then just yelling at him in general, like, no, stop it, this, that, right? All that's gonna do right now, unless you're actually gonna provide some sort of consequence for the behavior, all that's doing is just giving attention to it, and it's gonna make him wanna get back to you more. You know what I mean? And this is what I mean about, we're not even doing any sort of like training stuff, because right now, I know, dude, you gotta relax. And then obviously here's the behavior, right? So the frustration comes out because of the restraint, and that's where we'll see the behavioral issues start to come out of them. So it's typically not that he's aggressive or he wants to bite me or anything. It's that buildup of the impulsiveness, the frustration, and now I'm stopping him from doing something he wants to do. You know what I mean? So if anything, right, if we actually want to see some of this separation anxiety and stuff go away, or whatever you want to call it, right, it would actually be up to the other person to enforce it in that moment then, right? And there's some things you could do at home that'll help with this. Like I used to do a lot of like really long, like 45-minute to an hour long like bed stays in the house where I'd be out of sight doing something else, and I create that like forced separation. And then the kicker really is with it, you know, and you know, working dogs or sport dogs or anything like that, obviously we want to train everything as motivationally as possible, right? That's the goal with things. But truly what helps them finally get past this kind of stuff is realizing there is consequences for this stuff. You know what I mean? There we go. So right now, you know, first time I work with a dog like this, a lot of times I'm not adding a ton of consequences in, I'm just showing him it's just not working. You know what I mean? You gotta just get past this dude.
And he, I don't know if it matters or not, he does have like a long down.
Sure.
Where he's outside.
Yep. Yep.
He's not like that.
Yep, which is good, you know, and like I said, like I know, you know, I saw a couple videos and stuff that you've had of him, and I could tell like he's got some good training on him, right? I'm not questioning that by any means. It's just kind of how we go about doing the training that really helps get some of that state of mind shift with them. So, I know, buddy, it's a hard life. Yes. Now, I do things a little opposite than a lot of people do. Like a lot of people will go like, why wouldn't you just start it off with that? You know what I mean? And the way that I look at it in a lot of cases, like you mentioned like cooperative care, right? Like that's a big thing in the dog world right now, obviously, of like, you gotta get the dog to like this stuff. You want this to be a positive experience, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not denying that we want it to be a positive experience, but there are some things like we talked about that we have to know the dog is gonna let us do. You know what I mean? And that's why I start backwards with this stuff, where I need to make sure you're gonna allow me to do this first, right? From there, we'll start creating a positive association with stuff. Yes? Now, obviously, I'm waiting until, yeah, right? So I'm waiting until after the growl, obviously. So if he growls, I wait. Once I have him in a calm state of mind, yes, then I mark and reward. I know, buddy. And same day. Keep quiet, Stat, and I'll explain this. You're right in my ear. Woof, woof, woof. Yes. Do you want this? Are you gonna still take it from me? Are we still friends? Can we try again? And it's very common also as you start working through this process, like you're not gonna not see it at some point, you know what I mean? Which is why I'm not overly concerned about any of that right there, right? This is why you came here, right? So just continuing to work through it here. Make you realize it doesn't work. That's it.
How much follow-through do you think was there?
And that's the other thing too with that, that's what I was getting ready to say, but he was barking in my ear so I couldn't say it. Is there's very little commitment behind any of that, right? He wants me to go away, that's why he's doing it, right? But the only reason why I was holding back on the leash is just so he couldn't keep muzzle punching me, you know what I mean? But, and yes, those, I'm sure he would have bit, right? But it's not like he was coming at me, right? He was trying to actively get me to go away from him. Yes. Yes. Oh. Slobber all over me. Yes. Yes. I'm tired for you guys today. Maybe. Or maybe not. You gotta chill, big guy. Yes. So truthfully, I mean, for as much nonsense as there was there, he really still is not as bad as I think you might think, nor than I think I thought he was going to be going into this. You know, obviously, like, he's got his switch, right? And like, we kind of hit it at the end there, which is why he started like really going from like 0 to 60 with a lot of that kind of stuff. But that's kind of inevitable. If you have a dog that is, you know, basically for, what do you say, almost 2, something like that, for almost 2 years now has not really let anybody pet him, you know, examine him, things like that. Like, you're gonna find that point where he's like no longer okay with it. And the key is we have to work him past that point. You know what I mean? And the cool thing about all of that was that we got through all of it without, I mean, that was all without any corrections even. You know what I mean? That was just a matter of just getting him used to, like, behavior isn't working. You gotta still let us do this, right? And usually my process is I try to get as far through things as I can doing it that way. And then from there, inevitably there's gonna be a correction or two we have to add in to kind of tighten the rest of it up. And that's where they really kind of, you know, flip to the next level with it, where they get a lot more accepting of these types of things, right? Where he started with it, with the grumbling, like when I would grab, but it didn't really go much further than that, that's kind of where I'm looking to see him inhibit it at. You know what I mean? Like, if he could just not take it further than that, then that's kind of what I'm looking for. You know what I mean? But I really didn't think any of that was too horrible. And it's pretty on par with what was suspected. And then to your question, when you asked like halfway through, there's still not that much commitment behind that. You know, like obviously he was ramping up with it because I wasn't letting it work. And in most cases, you look at reactivity, you look at barking, growling, especially in those contexts where they're kind of defending themselves, it's like the most self-reinforcing behavior that there is. You know what I mean? Like he does it, and almost 100% of the time when he does it, it works, right? It makes the other person stop doing what it is they're doing. So then you say, okay, he's had a year and a half of it working every single time he's done it, and now it's not working. And in his mind, it's like, why isn't it working? Oh, I probably just need to try harder. So that's where we see them always hit that point where it looks worse than what you would have ever even seen, because it's the first time it's been pushed past that point. You know what I mean? And that's the first step of removing the reinforcement behind the behavior, right? If we want to stop or inhibit something, we have to first make sure, why is he doing it in the first place, right? He's doing it because clearly he's a little under-socialized with new people, obviously, and because the behavior works when he exhibits it. So what's the combination for working through that? We make sure we put ourselves in a position where we can start to socialize him a little bit more effectively, obviously, and additionally, we make sure there's no more reinforcement behind that behavior, right? Meaning anytime we are socializing him, we have to be in a position where he's not going to exhibit that behavior, or if he is going to exhibit that behavior, it doesn't work. Does that make sense? Right? So that's where you got back to my conversation where I said about like when I started socializing Vinny, I went 6 months of just a bed stay the whole time because I wanted to make sure before I even started that socialization process, he was bomb-proof just being around people. And all of this franticness that you kind of see out of him is pretty much diminished. You know what I mean? From there, once I started the introductions, it was with controlled groups of people, right? It was with people where they had specific instruction as far as this is how I want you to interact with them. Because had I never moved to the paw grabbing at that point, he probably would have been fine. You know what I mean? Like that's really where it flipped over the edge because I was kind of pushing to see how far can we go with this before that behavior does come out of him. You know what I mean? And had we started with just the petting, it probably wouldn't have been an issue. So then we start with that and we roll with that for a little while until he starts getting really comfortable with that, right? Once that looks good, then the next step of say paw holding, examining ears, whatever, any number of other behavioral issues that you may have like that, those instead of like right now how they're at like a level 10, right? Those are down to like a level 6, so they're easier to work through. You know what I mean? And then you work through that progression that way. But some of this is going to come down to obviously being in a position to enforce some of this stuff a little bit more strictly, or more if you guys aren't currently doing so. Being more consistent about how you're enforcing certain things, you know what I mean? I would really try to slow down some of the impulsiveness on his end, you know what I mean? Like give him his outlets for it, right? It sounds like you guys do a lot of like playing with him and stuff like that, which is phenomenal, right? Training, things like that. But outside of that, I would be looking to, especially if like you're gonna take him somewhere or things like that, a little bit more strict about the expectation with him. And this is all, keep in mind again, I'm making assumptions of how you guys are currently doing it because just what I'm seeing right now, right? And additionally, we want to keep working past those types of things with him, right? And get in a position where we could bring that behavior down a little so it's easier for you guys to then do at home.